We all go through different chapters in our lives, some stranger than others. Welcome to Strange Chapters, where we bring you true stories of the strange, the macabre, the paranormal, and the supernatural. So sit back, relax, and let's get to this week's featured author and their stories. This week's feature stories come from paranormal author and parapsychologist Dr. Elliott Van Dusen from his book, Supernatural Encounters, True Paranormal Accounts from Law Enforcement. Story 1. Blackett's Lake, Nova Scotia. Blackett's Lake is a small community located in Cape Breton Regional Municipality. The community is said to have been named after Walter Blackett, who was one of the two sons of William Blackett. The Blacketts originated from London, England, and immigrated to Prince Edward Island, Canada in the 1780s. Walter Blackett and his wife moved from PEI and established themselves and their 9 children on the shores of Blackett's Lake. One night in the late summer of 1994 or 1995, retired Corporal Patrick Murphy of the RCMP and his wife Candace had a supernatural experience in Blackett's Lake. Corporal Murphy is not a believer in the supernatural. He was a police officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for over 20 years and has driven some remote roads, but still to this day he cannot explain what he and Candace saw. Corporal Murphy and his wife were just teenagers and not married at the time. After a late evening of movie watching, Corporal Murphy drove Candace home in his parents' car. It was approximately 3 a.m. when Corporal Murphy and Candace reached the T intersection near the church. Corporal Murphy and Candace saw 2 identical twin girls with long blonde hair. They were both wearing olden day white dresses and carrying baskets. They looked like they were having fun as they were running through Bobby Barrington's property. Corporal Murphy asked Candace what the hell 2 little girls were doing outside so late at night. Suddenly, the 2 twin girls saw Corporal Murphy's vehicle approaching and they both stopped moving. Candace said that it was almost as if the 2 girls had never seen a vehicle before. They simply stood there and peered straight into Corporal Murphy and Candace's vehicle. Candace was scared and told Corporal Murphy to keep driving. Candace looked back at where the 2 girls were standing, but they were both gone. Corporal Murphy dropped Candace off at her house. Corporal Murphy said if he had been a police officer at the time, he probably would have stopped and interacted with the 2 girls, but at the time, he was 18 or 19 years old, and he was a little freaked out. Corporal Murphy did drive back the same way, but he didn't see anyone during his return trip. Both Corporal Murphy and Candace were completely sober at the time of the sighting. Corporal Murphy and Candace described the apparitions as being completely solid. According to Corporal Murphy's mother, Bobby Barrington never had any children. Local folklore states that 7 of the Blackett's kids went out onto the lake in a raft and drowned. 2 of the Blackett kids were said to have been twins. Another strange story surrounding Blackett's Lake is about a female from Ontario, Canada, who decided to fly to Sydney, Nova Scotia on a whim. She didn't have any family or friends in Cape Breton, nor had she ever previously stepped foot on the island. Upon landing in Sydney, she took a taxi out to Blackett's Lake and committed suicide by drowning herself in Blackett's Lake. Blackett's Lake is a paranormal hotbed of activity. Adventurers have reported that their compasses will not function properly around Coe Heath Mountain, which is connected to Blackett's Lake. Strange lights have been reported over the lake and surrounding area. Many individuals have also reported being followed by a dark entity or hearing terrible screams coming from the area late at night, such as witness John Repa. John reported that in the early spring of 1977, he and his friend Lawrence were in Blackett's Lake on their way to a dance in East Bay. They had taken a pint of rum from Lawrence's sister's house, but decided to stash it near an alder tree by the little bridge that connects to the Sydney River. They were afraid of getting caught with the rum at one of the police road checks on the way to the dance. Around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., Lawrence and John decided to return to the alder tree to pick up the pint of rum. They got into Lawrence's yellow Vega car and returned to Blackett's Lake. They stopped at the spot where they stashed the rum bottle and exited the vehicle. They went to retrieve the bottle of rum, but it was gone. They began searching the immediate area, but to no avail. Thinking that the bottle slid out underneath the snow somewhere, they retrieved a shovel from Lawrence's car. As they approached the last known location of the bottle of rum, they heard a loud, high-pitched scream or howl. Lawrence and John both froze in fear. The squealing scream lasted approximately 15 seconds, as the pitch becoming lower and lower. John described the voice as being really abrasive and horrible. The scream stopped after echoing off the hills. Fearing for their safety, Lawrence and John jumped back into the vehicle and left. The following day, John returned to the scene with his uncle. He had his uncle pull over to where he and Lawrence had stashed the bottle of rum. To his amazement, the pint of rum was in the exact same spot where he and Lawrence had left it. The experience left an impact on John. So much so, years later, he began researching the area at the Beaton Institute. He was able to learn that the original Blackett family were the first white settlers in the area and that they experienced strange phenomena. The Blackett family had experienced items moving, disappearing and reappearing, and they also heard the terrible howl. The great-granddaughter of Walter Blackett, Isabel Blackett Kennedy, reports that while her great-grandfather was building a cabin on Blackett's Lake, strange phenomena began occurring. One morning, carpenters and masons found stones from the wall, knocked out and strewn about the ground, but no footprints were seen. Neighbors took turns watching Blackett's property, but the nights were silent. The neighbors decided to sprinkle sand around the house and return home. The following morning, stones were once again knocked out and thrown around. There were no footprints in the sand either. On another evening, Elizabeth, Margaret, and Isabel, 3 granddaughters of Walter Blackett, decided to go to the construction site of the cabin in hopes of seeing the ghost. They looked into the dim cellar and saw a dark figure moving from one of the corners. It unleashed an ungodly sound. The 3 girls ran away and told their family. The family rounded up some neighbors armed with a rifle, lanterns, and pitchfork. Upon returning to the property, however, a great stone from the cellar had been thrown over a wall and lay on the ground. Nothing else was disturbed. The cabin was never completed, and Walter Blackett passed away. Local paranormal investigator Jason Murphy told me that one of his friends had seen an apparition described as the woman in white who appears on the bridge near the Sydney River. The sighting scared Jason's friend so bad that he still to this day will not drive around Blackett's Lake. Story 2. Halifax Provincial Court. Sheriff Kent Cone is a 15-year veteran with the Nova Scotia Sheriff Services. He is very familiar with the history of the Halifax Provincial Court, situated at 5250 Spring Garden Road, having been posted there for 6 years. Sheriff Cone said that there is at least one ghost who resides at the courthouse. The staff had nicknamed this entity Bill. Bill frequently resides in the courthouse's attic. A custodian, who has since passed on, once saw an apparition materialize in the attic. Sheriff Cone explained that the attic is one of the only original pieces of the courthouse, which was constructed in the 1850s. The attic acted as a makeshift accommodation for a caretaker at one point during its history. Sheriff Cone advised that the last hanging happened in 1935 at the back of the courthouse, which is now a staff parking lot. Local folklore amongst the courthouse personnel states at the end of the hanging, the wood from the gallows was used for upkeep purposes in the attic. Sheriff Cone has seen beams of wood in the attic with notches cut into them. He believes that it is possible wood from hanging had been used for renovations because back then, people didn't waste anything. Sheriff Cone said during renovations of the courthouse, it is not uncommon to find old leather shoes hidden throughout. The leather shoes were hidden throughout the courthouse to ward off spirits. Some of the floor joists in the attic still have leather shoes embedded in them. Thanks to archaeologists, we know that since at least the early modern period between 1500 AD and 1800 AD, humans have been hiding objects in the structure of buildings to ward off evil influences such as demons, ghosts, and witches. Shoes are the most commonly discovered items. However, written charms, dried cats, horse skulls, and witch bottles have also been used. Chimneys, underfloors, above ceilings, around doors, and in rooftops are common hiding places. This historic tradition is based on folklore in which many people believe that witches were attracted to the human scent of a shoe. It was believed that once a witch entered the shoe, they would find themselves trapped. Archaeologists also attribute this tradition to a legend involving a non-canonized saint named Sir John Shorn, who was said to have once captured the devil himself in a boot. Nonetheless, this tradition still continues today. I've investigated several alleged haunted houses in which the homeowners have buried or hidden religious medallions and objects throughout their home and property. Sheriff Cone has worked several late shifts, and even though he rationally knows that an old building such as a courthouse is prone to drafty windows and strange settling noises, he can't help but acknowledge the powerful and uncomfortable feeling that overcomes him when he is in the attic. It's not just Sheriff Cone who feels this way. None of the courthouse staff like attending the attic. In fact, there's a ritual to announce yourself with a hello before entering the attic. Sheriff Cone was trying to do this in an attempt to appease any spirits who may be lurking in the attic. There are also original cells which are non-operational and dirt flooring in an old wing of the courthouse which is not used. There are strange markings on the wall which have never been explained. Underneath the grand staircase in the front lobby of the courthouse lies the modern-day cell block. You can access it through the security door. One evening after night court, Sheriff Cone, 2 other sheriffs, and 2 cleaners were divvying up their final task for the evening to make sure that no one was hiding in the courthouse before securing the doors. No one was jumping at the opportunity to check the attic due to stories about the ghost. Sheriff Cone quickly jumped on the task of checking the modern-day cell block. thinking that he may avoid any unusual encounters with Bill the Ghost. Sheriff Cohn went on to secure the door near the grand staircase and swiped a security guard. He turned the doorknob and opened the door. As the door opened about 1.5 feet, someone grabbed the door handle from the other side and slammed it shut. Sheriff Cohn let go of the doorknob and stared at it for a couple of seconds. He quickly used his card again and opened the door. He looked behind the door, but there was no one there. He began rationalizing what had just happened. He knew that it wasn't the other two sheriffs or the two cleaners because he had just seen them depart for their duties about 90 seconds prior. There was no draft and nobody located down the long stretch of hallway behind the secure door. To this day, Sheriff Cohn still gets shivers throughout his body whenever he recalls the incident. Several years ago, parapsychologist Dr. Darrell Wash spoke to staff at the courthouse while researching stories for his book, Ghosts of Nova Scotia. The staff told him that they can sometimes hear the sounds of someone moving around in the attic. He was also told that the custodian had quit after seeing a pair of eyes peering at him from within the darkness of the attic. I spoke to another sheriff friend of mine, Carl Murphy, who also worked at the Halifax Provincial Court. While working night court, Sheriff Murphy was monitoring the cameras when something caught his attention. The chandelier in the main foyer began to sway back and forth on its own accord. Sheriff Murphy was the only sheriff working at the time and said that the building didn't have any ventilation systems or heat pumps, and all the doors and windows were closed. Sheriff Murphy corroborated Sheriff Cohn's testimony regarding pieces of the gallows being located in the attic. Sheriff Murphy was more fascinated with the local lore that a tunnel runs from Halifax Provincial Courthouse underneath the Halifax Old Burial Grounds all the way to the Nova Scotia Lieutenant Governor's house situated on Barrington Street. He has never seen the tunnel himself, but he's convinced that there is a passageway contained within the Halifax Provincial Court building. The city of Halifax is known for its secret tunnels. The famous Halifax brewmaster, Alexander Keith, had a tunnel which led from his brewery, located on Lower Water Street, to his residence a couple blocks away on Hollis Street. Story 3. The Wandering Soldier. George and Marilyn Morrison lived in Elmville Acres, situated at 2029 Corey Street, in a relatively quiet neighborhood. One of the neighbors recently had their house broken into, so residents were paying closer attention to who was coming and going. Corey Street was a U-shaped street, and the Morrison residence was close to the corner of the street. On one cold winter evening in Ottawa, Ontario, Marilyn Morrison woke up between the hours of 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. When her husband George was away on duty with the Canadian Forces, Marilyn would often suffer from a restless night's sleep. Unable to sleep, Marilyn peeked out of her bedroom window. She admired the beauty of the freshly fallen snow, which was illuminated by the street lamp. Suddenly, Marilyn saw something moving outside. She saw a figure walking down the street. This piqued her curiosity because it was quite late in the morning for someone to be casually strolling down Corey Street. As the figure walked by her house, she could see that it was a man. The man was wearing an old-fashioned, 3/4 length thick gray military coat. He was wearing Mountie-type high brown boots and had a tilted Stetson on his head. The man wasn't rushing, he was sauntering along. His footsteps disturbed the freshly set snow. Marilyn initially thought it was a teenager. She said during this time in Ottawa, kids were purchasing military clothing in secondhand stores and wearing it as a fashion trend. The man kept walking till he reached the curve at the end of Corey Street. At the end of the street stood a discarded snow pile that the plow had deposited there from previous storms. The man continued walking up the snow hill and cut toward the backyard of a residence. The man had now disappeared from Marilyn's sight. Fearing that the man may be looking to do a break-and-enter, she phoned the Ottawa police. A police officer attended Marilyn's residence. She invited him inside her house and provided a description of the man and what she had witnessed. The footsteps were visible to the police officer from Marilyn's front porch, so he decided to follow them. The police officer later returned to Marilyn's residence and told her that he followed the footsteps. To his amazement, there were only 2 or 3 footsteps leading up the snow hill at the end of the road, and then they stopped. Marilyn swore up and down to the officer that the man had traveled in that direction before disappearing from her sight. The police officer asked for the description of the man one more time. Marilyn provided him with the same description as before. The police officer responded, "You know what? I think you saw a ghost." Marilyn was taken aback by his comments, but the police officer further explained that years and years ago, the land that Corey Street was built on used to be a military encampment. Ottawa is certainly known as a government city. A mere 3.5 kilometers away from 2029 Corey Street is the Department of National Defense building, located at 1745 Alta Vista Drive, which houses the 33 Canadian Brigade Group of the Canadian Army. The Elmville Acre subdivision was developed in the 1950s by Robert Campeau. The land fell within the Gloucester Township, which had been established in 1792. I couldn't locate any records that confirmed the military had specifically used Corey Street for anything in particular. I was, however, able to discover that the subdivision and the Department of National Defense building on Alta Vista Drive fall within the city of Ottawa's Ward 18, commonly referred to as the Alta Vista Ward. Furthermore, the area has always had a military presence dating as far back as 1853, when the Rideau Canal ceased to be used as a military canal. Nonetheless, the identity of the military apparition that Miss Morrison had seen remains a mystery. All right, I hope y'all enjoyed these 3 stories from Dr. Elliott Van Dusen's Supernatural Encounters, True Paranormal Accounts from Law Enforcement. You can find all of the links to his books in the show notes, and please go give us a like and a subscribe and a review if you can. And y'all stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.